Here are the first three things you want to keep in mind when making a conlang, or a constructed language. First, the phonetics and the phonology. Second, the morphology. And third, the syntax. Something you should know is that you could spend your entire life trying to construct a conlang and never get it to the level of a real language, so give up on that goal. However, you can do a lot of really cool, good things that will be helpful for your book. Now, if you want to be really hardcore and do everything you need to do to make your language as speakable as possible, like Tolkien did, then you might want to check out some of the videos below. But if you're making a conlang primarily for the purposes of your book, things that can be helpful for you as an author and for the characters in your world, please keep watching. This is going to be a quick, easy video. So let's dive in with that first point that I mentioned, the phonetics and the phonology. This is really just a fancy way of saying, what does your language sound like? Now, a lot of linguists and creators out there would suggest that you go to the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, to construct the sounds of your language. The IPA is basically a list of every sound that is possible to create with a human voice. I think this can be helpful, and if you want to be hardcore, I suggest you do it and go down to some of the videos I have listed below. But I'm going to say we skip that step. I personally don't do this often with my languages because it's very time consuming, and I think there are other things you can do to construct the sounds, the phonetics and phonology of your language without going knee deep into the International Phonetic Alphabet. So let's get started. Basically, you have to decide what you want your language to sound like, and not necessarily just will it be pretty or will it be harsh. I'm talking about what letters and constructions of letters are possible in this language. For example, in one of my languages that I wanted to be a little bit softer, I took out the letter K and the letter G. Those are both plosive velars, if you want to know, and they give words a kind of a harder, stronger feel that I was trying to avoid for this language in particular. Then you want to think about the kinds of words you want to have. Are there lots of long words? Are there lots of short words? How many syllables do the words usually have? Those kinds of things. Do words often start with vowels, or do they never start with vowels? There are some languages I've created that it is against the phonology of the language to start a word with a vowel, whereas I have another language where many of their words start with vowels. Those are the kinds of decisions you want to make. Create a structure, create a system that you're going to be consistent with, that you like, and then start creating words in those systems. Think about the consonants of the words. Are you going to have CVC, CVCC? How many consonants are you going to allow in a row? Is having 3 consonants in a row going to be not allowed, very rare, or in every single word there's going to be 3 consonants in a row? Decide these kinds of things, write them down, look at them, decide if you like them, adjust them, and keep going. When you've got a system that you like, start experimenting, creating sounds you want included in your language. Not words, but sounds. For example, in one of the languages that I created, I knew I wanted to have sounds like osh, kaz, tar, and etc. So I made a list of phonemes, not words, but sounds like that on my computer, and then I started combining those to create words, and I reused them many times in different orders to create words that all had a similar feel. As you do this, you can adjust your system, you can think about the structure a little bit more and decide if you want to change anything. Remember that this is never going to be a finished project, so you're welcome to change anything you want to at any point, but don't let being not finished stop you from continuing. Before you've decided the entire phonological and phonetic structure, start experimenting with words and see if it's working. If it's working well, keep going, and always know you can backtrack to fix things as you go along or to tweak things as you go along. Once you've created some of these phonemes and started messing around with what you want words to look like, you can then just create a bunch of words. Now, don't worry about meanings yet, just bunches of words using these phonemes you've created. If this feels overwhelming, there are also word generators you can look up online where you put in the phonemes you've created and it'll give you lists and lists of words using the rules that you've set up. Once you have the sounds of the language semi-established, again, not completed, but semi-established, you can move on to start thinking about morphology. Morphology is just a fancy way of saying the structure of the words in the language and how that structure changes the meaning. I'm talking about things like affixes, suffixes and prefixes, derivations, verbal conjugations, cases and declensions if you want to have them. These kinds of things, though they sound overwhelming, will actually be extremely helpful as you continue constructing your language. Right here in the natal stages of your language, just decide on a few prefixes that you want to have. What does kaz mean, for example? Maybe it means big or small. And start experimenting with how that sounds at the beginning of some of the other phonemes you've created. Randomly assign some meanings to the words you've created. For example, maybe I take this word and I decide I want it to mean sword. And then I take a prefix and I put it behind it and I see, okay, that means big sword. I like that very much. And I move on. I want to say this is a morphological construction. In English, for example, saying big sword actually takes 2 words. Big is its own word that we put in the sentence structure before sword. However, in the example I just gave, the prefix is a part of the noun. They become a single word together that means big sword. So here's the next big decision you need to make. Is your language going to be more morphological or syntactical in structure? The differences in those are simple, mostly what I just described. Are you going to have a lot of changes and derivations within the word's structure itself that can change and affect the meaning? Or do you want that to happen more on a sentence level? For example, in Spanish, if you want to say I will speak, as in I will speak tomorrow, future tense, you can say hablaré. Now, hablar is the infinitive of to speak. In English, if I wanted to say I will speak, that takes 3 words. You need to include will in the syntactic structure of the sentence to signal future tense. But in Spanish, you don't need another word. You just conjugate hablar to become hablaré, and that changes the meaning to be future tense by itself. So you can decide if you want more words in your language, things like will and other auxiliaries that will change the meaning of your words and sentences, or do you want those things to be more morphological and happen within the words? Obviously, it isn't one or the other. Every language is on a spectrum. You can be anywhere you would like in the middle. So start playing around with it. How many prefixes do you want to have? Do you want conjugations that can change nuances in meaning, or would you prefer to have other words you have to put in before or after that do the same thing? Those are the kinds of decisions you should make now. More morphological languages can sometimes get extremely long words. Here's an example from one of my languages. This word here means we will hunt them all. In English, that's an entire sentence, but in this language I created, Casa d'Autor, it is one word with multiple prefixes and affixes and conjugations. As you continue thinking about the morphology of your language and how you want that to look, start thinking about the syntax as well. Syntax is just a fancy way of saying the order of the sentences in your language. Did you know that different languages have different sentence orders? You can have subject, verb, object, object, subject, verb, verb, subject, object, and a bunch of other constructions. Not every one of these exists in the real world, but you can do whatever you would like in your fantasy languages. Every complete sentence needs at least a subject and a predicate, basically a noun and a verb. Although they can also have direct objects, indirect objects, subject to the preposition, etc. Lots of clauses and relative clauses compounding on each other. Don't worry about all that for now. Just think about, do I want the subject or the verb to come first? Do I want to say I run or run I? On that same note, you also have to decide if you want the adjectives coming before or after the noun. For example, in Spanish, if you want to say I want the red ball, you would actually say I want the ball red, and the red would come after the noun. As you think about the syntax of your language, how you want the sentences to be structured, that may end up impacting how morphological you want your language to be. Again, this is a spectrum, so don't feel like you need to be wholly one or the other. Every language has a little bit of both, although they usually do lean one way or another. So have fun experimenting, see if you like syntactical constructions or morphological constructions better, and see which one ends up creating the language that you were looking for. I know this has been a fire hose of information, but I really wanted to try and keep this video under 5 minutes. If you want to be really hardcore in creating a language as realistic as possible, I suggest you look up longer, really in-depth videos that break this kind of stuff down, the kinds of things I'm including below. Now, I hope this was helpful. I invite you to be experimenting with the sounds, the meaning, and the structure of your language. See if you can come across some constructions that you enjoy, that you like, that you want to include in your language, and then just keep extrapolating, keep experimenting, and keep exploring. Remember that you don't need to have everything set up before you start experimenting. Once you have some sounds, start thinking about the morphology. Once you have a little bit of morphology, start thinking about the syntax. And then just start creating the language, which is the fun part. Start assigning meanings to sounds. Start constructing them, switching their places, moving them around, coming up with derivations. Derivation is just a fancy way of saying different versions of a word, like nation can become national, which can become international. Those are all derivations of the same word. Start trying to do that kind of stuff in your book. Start trying to think of how can I combine these words to mean other things. For example, can I combine the word water and the word falling to create the word rain in this language? That can be a lot of fun. And as you do this, start compiling lists of words and their meanings on some kind of document on your computer. I have dictionaries for each of the languages that I create, which is extremely helpful. And it becomes so fun to include this in my book. Like, they go to a new place and I'm like, oh man, here's a mountain. I don't want to think of a cool name for this mountain, but wait, I can just name this mountain Big Rock Mountain in a different language, and now it's got a cool name. It has become so helpful to have a bank of languages and words that I can include in my world's creation. It's streamlined a lot of my world building and really made the books themselves more interesting. So I invite you to start experimenting, don't be afraid of making mistakes, and have fun. I hope this was helpful. Have fun writing languages for your books, and I will see you in my next video.